The morning sun barely filtered through the tall windows of Lincoln Tech Academy as the students dragged themselves into the building, chatter filling the hallways. It was supposed to be just another day, another routine in the endless cycle of classes, assignments, and teenage drama. But inside the advanced engineering lab on the second floor, a story was about to unfold that no one would ever forget. A story that would scar reputations, in one boy's arrogance forever, and reveal the terrifying hidden past of a woman who seemed so ordinary until she wasn't. Dr. Sarah Kane was the new advanced engineering instructor. She wasn't young like the fresh graduates the academy usually hired, but not too old either. Somewhere in her mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a presence that commanded silence without her even trying. The students whispered about her, saying she was too strict, too cold, too secretive. No one knew where she came from. She wore long-sleeved blouses even in warm weather. Her posture always upright like a soldier. Her gaze sharp like she could read every thought in the room. For weeks, the students speculated about her. Some said she was divorced. Others said she was just lonely. And a few whispered something darker, that she wasn't just a teacher, but someone who had lived another life before stepping into this classroom. They were right, but no one knew the truth yet. Her movements carried the precision of someone trained for combat, the discipline of someone who had faced life and death situations. But Lincoln Tech Academy saw only another instructor, another face in their faculty roster. The advanced engineering lab hummed with expensive equipment and sophisticated machinery. Computer-controlled lathes, precision measurement tools, and prototype development stations filled the space where tomorrow's engineers would learn their craft. Dr. Kane moved through this environment with the same calculated awareness she had once used to navigate far more dangerous terrain. Every student position mapped, every potential hazard assessed, every exit route memorized. But in this world of privileged students and cutting-edge technology, she was about to encounter a different kind of threat. One that would force her to reveal skills she had spent years trying to forget. In every class, there was always one, the bully, the boy who thought the world belonged to him, who believed teachers were beneath him, who had never been told no in his life. His name was Tyler Morrison, the son of a wealthy tech mogul who practically owned half the city. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that always carried an arrogant smirk, Tyler was used to fear and obedience. The teachers either tolerated him or ignored his outbursts because they feared his father's power. He mocked classmates, shoved smaller kids into lockers, cheated on tests, and when caught, simply shrugged as if the rules were written for others, not him. Morrison Technologies had invested millions in Lincoln Tech Academy's infrastructure. The gleaming laboratories, the state-of-the-art equipment, even the scholarships that allowed less privileged students to attend, all bore the Morrison family name somewhere in the fine print. This financial leverage translated into untouchable status for Tyler. Faculty members who dared discipline him found themselves reassigned or quietly terminated when their contracts came up for renewal. Dr. Kane was different. She didn't flinch when he mocked her lessons, didn't stutter when he raised his voice. She simply looked at him with those piercing eyes of hers, and that alone made him uneasy. Tyler didn't like being made uneasy. He didn't like being reminded that he wasn't in control. His usual tactics of intimidation seemed to bounce off her like rain on armor plating. The other students had learned to stay quiet when Tyler unleashed his verbal assaults on teachers. They watched with the resigned acceptance of prisoners, witnessing daily brutality from guards they could never challenge. But something was different about how Dr. Kane received these attacks. She absorbed them without visible reaction, processing each insult with the detached analysis of someone cataloging intelligence on an enemy combatant. Tyler's friends, a collection of equally privileged students who served as his audience and validation, snickered at his performances. They fed off his cruelty like parasites, gaining social status through proximity to his power. But even they sensed something unsettling about Dr. Kane's composure. Her silence wasn't submission. It was calculation. The first confrontations began during the second week of classes. The advanced engineering lab buzzed with the hum of precision machinery and the quiet concentration of students working with expensive equipment. Dr. Kane moved between the workstations with her usual measured stride, correcting a calibration here, adjusting a safety protocol there. Her movements carried the efficiency of someone accustomed to working under pressure in high-stakes environments. Tyler leaned against his workstation, arms crossed, watching her with calculating eyes. He had been testing boundaries for days, dropping subtle insults disguised as questions, challenging her technical knowledge with the arrogance of someone who believed money could purchase expertise. His friends gathered around him like courtiers attending a king, eager to witness his next performance. "Hey, Dr. Kane," Tyler drawled loud enough for everyone to hear, his voice dripping with manufactured respect that fooled no one. "Are you sure you know how to operate this equipment? Or are you just reading from the manual like the rest of us?" The class tensed. Everyone knew Tyler's pattern. Start with seemingly innocent questions, escalate to direct challenges, then move to personal attacks until his target either broke or retreated. Dr. Kane paused in her inspection of a computer-controlled lathe, her hands steady on the machine's control panel. She turned slowly, those sharp gray eyes fixing on Tyler with the intensity of a targeting system acquiring a hostile contact. The silence stretched uncomfortable and thick, filled only by the mechanical whispers of cooling fans and servo motors. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice calm, but edged with something that made several students instinctively straighten in their chairs. "This equipment requires precision and respect, both qualities that seem to be missing from your approach to this class. Perhaps you should focus more on learning and less on performing for your audience." The words hit like controlled detonations. Tyler's smirk faltered for just a moment before reasserting itself, but the damage was done. She had identified his behavior as performance, stripped away the pretense, and done it with surgical precision. His friends shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware they had been labeled as his audience rather than his allies. The laboratory session that would change everything began like any other. Students filed into their assigned positions around workstations, equipped with precision machining tools, electronic measurement devices, and prototype development equipment worth more than most people's cars. The air hummed with the subtle vibrations of high-tech machinery and carried the faint ozone scent of electronic components operating at their limits. Dr. Kane conducted her usual safety briefing with military precision, emphasizing the dangers of rotating machinery, high-voltage systems, and the toxic chemicals used in circuit board etching. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had seen what happened when safety protocols were ignored, though none of the students could have guessed the context of that experience. Tyler positioned himself at the most expensive workstation, a computer-controlled milling machine capable of creating components with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. He handled the equipment with casual disregard, ignoring the careful setup procedures Dr. Kane had demonstrated. His fingers moved over controls with the reckless confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. The first incident occurred when Tyler bypassed the safety interlock on his machine, allowing it to operate with the protective guard open. The spinning cutting tool whirred dangerously close to his hand as he reached across the work surface to adjust his project. Dr. Kane appeared beside him instantly, her movement so swift and silent that Tyler startled backward. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice sharp as a blade, "that safety system exists to prevent you from losing fingers. Engage the interlock immediately." Her hand moved to the machine's emergency stop button with practiced efficiency, bringing the dangerous equipment to an immediate halt. Tyler's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. The other students had stopped their work to watch the confrontation, their expressions a mixture of fascination and fear. He had been publicly corrected by a teacher in front of his audience, something his ego could not tolerate. "Don't tell me how to use equipment my father paid for," Tyler snarled, his voice rising above the background hum of machinery. Tyler's explosive outburst echoed through the laboratory like a gunshot. "Don't tell me what to do," he roared, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. "You're not my boss. My dad pays your salary." He gestured wildly at the expensive equipment surrounding them, his voice carrying the entitled fury of someone who had never been denied anything in his life. The condescension was thick enough to cut with a knife. He was testing her, prodding her, enjoying the perceived power dynamic. He and his friends represented the cutting edge of technological privilege, the most elite students in the most advanced program. This woman was just another instructor, another piece of living history that had forgotten to crumble into dust. Dr. Kane's expression remained unchanged, but something inside her had shifted. The placid surface remained, but beneath it, an ancient tide had turned. Her voice when she spoke was barely above a whisper, yet it carried clearly through the suddenly silent laboratory. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her tone carrying the kind of weight that made even nervous students focus. "In this laboratory, safety and discipline control everything. Your father's money does not override physics, chemistry, or the basic rules that keep people alive." The finality in her voice was like a wall he couldn't break. For a second, Tyler hesitated, unsure why his heart skipped a beat. But pride was poison, and he had swallowed too much of it. His friends were watching. The whole class was watching. He couldn't back down now. The other students held their breath, sensing the dangerous escalation. They had seen Tyler destroy teachers before, watched him reduce grown adults to stammering apologies with his combination of financial leverage and verbal brutality. But Dr. Kane stood her ground with the immovable certainty of someone who had faced far worse than an entitled teenager. "Or what?" Tyler sneered, stepping closer to her, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "What will you do if I don't follow your precious safety protocols?" The disrespect was a palpable thing now, hanging in the air thick and sour like toxic vapor from the etching chemicals. That's when Tyler Morrison made his fatal mistake. In a reckless burst of rage, he did something no student should ever dream of doing. He reached out, grabbed Dr. Kane by the wrist, and shoved her back against the lab counter. Gasps echoed through the room. Chairs scraped as students stood up in shock. Some fumbled for their phones. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Tyler's hand clenched around her wrist, his face twisted in triumph. "What now, huh?" he spat. "What will you do now?" The expensive machinery hummed around them, oblivious to the violence erupting in their sterile technological sanctuary. His friends stood paralyzed, suddenly realizing they were witnessing something that crossed every line. But then it happened. Dr. Kane's eyes didn't widen in fear, they narrowed. In that split second, something shifted in the room. The teacher was gone, and in her place, something far deadlier stood. Years of training, of combat, of discipline, buried under the facade of a quiet instructor, surged to the surface like a flood breaking through a dam. Her hand shot up like lightning, gripping his wrist in an iron hold. Tyler's smug expression faltered as pain shot through his arm. Her other hand slammed against his elbow, bending it in a direction it wasn't meant to go. The sound of his body meeting the counter rang like thunder across the lab as she spun behind him in one fluid motion. The entire class froze, mouths open, eyes wide. Dr. Kane hadn't just defended herself. She had moved with a precision and ferocity no ordinary teacher possessed. This wasn't a lucky defensive reaction. This was the controlled violence of someone trained to neutralize threats with surgical efficiency. Tyler struggled against her grip, but the more he fought, the tighter her hold became. His friends didn't dare move. Nobody did. For the first time in his life, Tyler Morrison wasn't in control. He was prey, caught in the grip of a predator he never saw coming. The expensive equipment around them continued its electronic whispers, indifferent to the sudden reversal of power that had just occurred in their midst. She pressed him down against the lab counter, her voice low, deadly, whispering just loud enough for the class to hear. "You don't know who you're dealing with." The words carried the weight of battlefields and combat zones that Tyler's privileged world could never comprehend. Her grip was professional, controlled, the kind of restraint technique taught to soldiers who needed to subdue without killing. Tyler groaned, tried to twist free, but her hold only intensified with each movement. His expensive designer clothes wrinkled against the cold steel surface as he realized the full scope of his miscalculation. The boy who had terrorized so many students, who had laughed in the faces of teachers, was now trembling, sweat trickling down his temple. "Apologize," she commanded. The word cracked through the silence like a whip. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to giving orders in life and death situations, someone who expected immediate compliance, because hesitation could mean casualties. Tyler struggled again, his face pressed against the workstation where moments before he had been carelessly operating dangerous machinery. The irony was lost on him, but not on the watching students who saw their tormentor reduced to helplessness by the woman he had so badly underestimated. "Say it," she repeated, her tone laced with steel that had been forged in places far from academic institutions. The pressure on his arm increased slightly, a reminder that her restraint was a choice, not a limitation. Her other hand maintained perfect control of his position, keeping him immobilized with techniques learned in environments where mistakes meant death. The classroom had become a theater of justice, every student witnessing the complete reversal of the power dynamic they thought they understood. Tyler Morrison, the untouchable prince of Lincoln Tech Academy, was discovering that there were forces in the world that his father's money couldn't influence, couldn't buy, couldn't intimidate. "I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice breaking with humiliation and genuine fear. "I'm sorry." The words came out choked, barely audible, but they carried the weight of his first real lesson in consequences. Dr. Kane released him with a controlled movement, stepping back with the fluid precision of someone trained in close-quarters combat. Tyler stumbled forward, clutching his arm, his face pale and humiliated. No one laughed. No one dared. The room was frozen in awe and disbelief at what they had just witnessed. She stood tall, adjusting her sleeves with the same methodical care she brought to everything else, her expression returning to its usual professional calm. But in her eyes, a storm brewed, a past that no one could even imagine. The transformation had been complete and terrifying. One moment, she was Dr. Kane, the quiet engineering instructor. The next, she had become something else entirely, something forged in places where violence was a tool of survival. The Advanced Engineering Lab, with its gleaming machinery and cutting-edge technology, suddenly felt different. The expensive equipment that had seemed so important moments before now appeared insignificant compared to the raw capability they had just observed. The precision instruments and computer-controlled devices paled in comparison to the human weapon that had been hiding in plain sight among them. She looked at the class, her voice steady and controlled once again. "Class dismissed." The words carried finality that brooked no argument. Students began gathering their things in stunned silence, their movements careful and deliberate, as if sudden motions might trigger another demonstration of her capabilities. Tyler remained frozen near the workstation, still processing what had just happened to him. The boy who had never faced real consequences, who had believed his father's wealth made him untouchable, was discovering that there were powers in the world that operated outside the rules he thought he understood. His friends, the collection of privileged students who had served as his audience and validation, now looked at him with something approaching pity. The performance was over, and the performer had been exposed as powerless against someone with real training, real experience, real strength that had nothing to do with money or social status. The electronic hum of the laboratory equipment continued unchanged, indifferent to the human drama that had just unfolded. But everything else had shifted fundamentally. As students filed out in shocked silence, their gazes darted between Tyler, still clutching his arm, and Dr. Kane, who stood like a soldier returning to parade rest. The weight of what they had witnessed pressed down on everyone present. This wasn't just about one confrontation between a teacher and student. This was about the complete exposure of illusions they had all been living under. Tyler's usual swagger was gone, replaced by the stunned disbelief of someone whose entire worldview had just been shattered. He had built his identity around being untouchable, around using his father's wealth and influence as weapons that could defeat any opponent. But Dr. Kane had neutralized him with nothing more than skill, training, and the kind of controlled violence that spoke of experiences far beyond anything Lincoln Tech Academy could offer. The other students moved carefully around him as they gathered their belongings, no longer seeing the intimidating figure who had terrorized them for months. Instead, they saw someone who had been revealed as fundamentally powerless when faced with real capability. The Emperor had no clothes, and everyone could see his nakedness now. Dr. Kane's professional demeanor never wavered as she began securing the laboratory equipment with the same methodical precision she brought to everything. Her hands moved efficiently across control panels and safety systems, each action deliberate and necessary. But there was something different in her bearing now, a subtle acknowledgement that her carefully constructed cover had been partially blown. She had spent years building this quiet academic identity, burying her military past under layers of normalcy and routine. But Tyler's assault had triggered responses that came from a place deeper than conscious thought, muscle memory, and training that belonged to a different version of herself, someone who had operated in environments where hesitation meant death. The expensive machinery around them continued its electronic whispers, indifferent to the human transformation that had just occurred. But the social dynamics of Lincoln Tech Academy had been permanently altered. Word would spread through the interconnected student body like wildfire, carrying with it the end of Tyler Morrison's reign of intimidation and the beginning of something else entirely. Word spread through Lincoln Tech Academy with the speed and thoroughness that only modern technology could provide. Within minutes of the engineering lab incident, dozens of smartphones had captured and transmitted the story across social media platforms, group chats, and messaging apps. The narrative was electric, almost unbelievable. Tyler Morrison, the untouchable prince of privilege, had been completely destroyed by a quiet instructor nobody had paid attention to. The videos were grainy, shot from awkward angles by students too shocked to hold their phones steady, but they captured enough to validate the incredible story. Tyler grabbing Dr. Kane's wrist, the lightning-fast response that left him pressed against the lab counter, his stammered apology echoing through the suddenly silent classroom. Each clip was shared, analyzed, and reshared with commentary that grew more amazed with each iteration. Students who had suffered under Tyler's bullying for years watched the footage with expressions of pure satisfaction. The boy who had made their lives miserable, who had used his father's money like a weapon to crush anyone who opposed him, had been revealed as completely powerless against someone with real training and experience. His social media presence, once filled with arrogant posts about his family's wealth and his own superiority, became a liability overnight. Screenshots of his most obnoxious moments were paired with video clips of his humiliation, creating a narrative of comeuppance that resonated far beyond the Academy's walls. The hashtag #TylerMorrisonDown began trending locally as students from other schools picked up the story. His reputation, carefully constructed over years of intimidation and financial leverage, crumbled in real time as the internet processed his spectacular downfall. His circle of friends, the privileged students who had enabled his behavior in exchange for social status, began distancing themselves immediately. The association that had once provided protection and prestige now carried the stench of failure and humiliation. Their group chat, once filled with cruel jokes at other students' expense, fell silent as they processed the implications of what they had witnessed. Tyler's assault on a teacher and subsequent defeat became viral content that would follow him forever. The administrative consequences unfolded with the inexorable momentum of an avalanche. Within hours of the incident, Tyler Morrison found himself sitting in the principal's office facing a tribunal that included not only school administrators, but also representatives from the district's legal department. The viral videos had created a public relations nightmare that required immediate damage control. Principal Margaret Stevens had dealt with disciplinary issues throughout her career, but physical assault of a faculty member crossed every line that existed in educational environments. The fact that the incident had been captured on multiple devices and spread across social media platforms made any attempt at quiet resolution impossible. Dr. Kane's military background, revealed through emergency personnel files accessed during the investigation, painted a picture that shocked even veteran administrators. Combat engineer specialist, multiple deployment tours, decorated veteran who had chosen education as her second career. The woman Tyler had attacked wasn't just a teacher. She was someone who had served her country with distinction in some of the world's most dangerous locations. The legal implications were staggering. Assault charges against a minor were complicated, but the clear video evidence and the involvement of social media created pressures that couldn't be ignored. Tyler's father, the tech mogul whose financial contributions had previously shielded his son from consequences, found himself facing a situation that money couldn't simply make disappear. Morrison Technologies' board of directors convened an emergency meeting as the scandal threatened to damage their corporate reputation. The company's association with Lincoln Tech Academy, once a source of positive publicity about supporting education, had become a liability that required careful management. Their golden child had become a public relations disaster. Tyler's expulsion was announced that afternoon, along with a formal statement about the Academy's zero-tolerance policy for violence against faculty. The boy who had never faced real consequences for his actions was discovering that some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Criminal charges followed within days, filed by a district attorney's office that couldn't ignore such a public and documented case of assault. Tyler Morrison's future, once guaranteed by wealth and privilege, lay in ruins. 6 months later, Dr. Sarah Kane stood before a new class of engineering students in the same laboratory where everything had changed. The expensive machinery hummed with familiar efficiency, but the atmosphere was completely different. Word of the Tyler Morrison incident had become legend at Lincoln Tech Academy, a cautionary tale whispered among students about respect, consequences, and the dangerous assumption that quiet people were weak people. Her reputation had evolved from mysterious newcomer to respected authority figure whose past added gravity to every lesson she taught. Students listened with attention that went beyond mere academic requirement. They understood they were learning from someone who had applied engineering principles in environments where miscalculations meant death, someone whose expertise had been tested under conditions they could barely imagine. Tyler Morrison's name had become synonymous with spectacular failure and misguided arrogance. His assault conviction had made him ineligible for admission to any reputable educational institution. The viral videos of his humiliation continued to circulate, ensuring that his moment of defeated helplessness would follow him indefinitely. His father's wealth, once his shield against consequences, had proven useless against the justice system and public opinion. The engineering lab continued its mission of preparing the next generation of technological innovators, but with a renewed understanding that true strength came from knowledge, discipline, and respect rather than financial leverage or social status. Dr. Kane's presence served as a daily reminder that the most dangerous people were often the quietest ones, those who carried their capabilities without advertising them. Her military past, no longer hidden, had become part of her teaching toolkit. Students learned not just about stress analysis and material properties, but about the real-world applications where engineering failures had life and death consequences. Her lessons carried weight because they came from someone who had seen technology succeed and fail in the most demanding environments possible. The incident became a permanent part of Lincoln Tech Academy's culture, a story that demonstrated how quickly arrogance could be destroyed by encountering genuine competence. Tyler Morrison had learned too late that respect wasn't something money could purchase, and some people's quiet strength ran deeper than any privilege could reach.